Welcome, welcome. Welcome all. Welcome to our keynote mashup plenary session. We'll give this 1 more minute for folks to come in, and then we'll officially get started. My name is Braveheart Gilanni. I use he, him, his pronouns, and I am one of the co-chairs for the student organized colloquium. And I'm organizing this colloquium along with the fabulous Cherie Dirk, who you see on the screen as well. The theme for our colloquium today is relationships for resilience. And we have worked really hard this year to ensure that the voice and interests of the community was developed and considered. So this theme came about after reaching out to all of you and identifying the main themes the community wanted to engage in. So the theme, Relationships for Resilience, was determined after many conversations and discussions, polls, surveys, lots of feedback. And so what do we mean by relationships for resilience? Under this theme, we invited participants to explore the significance of our interdependence for developing a thriving global society. Firstly, how are we intentionally fostering connections as a system dynamics community at present? Can we identify and activate leverage points within our networks to build an even more resilient, equitable, and inclusive community? Secondly, what roles do our relationships play in reinforcing SD? And what are the best practices that assist us in addressing current and emerging global themes? And lastly, what novel innovations within our networks are needed to help us move beyond business as usual, build and strengthen individual and collective belonging and resilience? And there is no one who can talk about these things better than our great teachers and mentors who are present today. We have Dr. Josephine Musango and we have Dr. Irene Headen. And just to orient us, we are right here. So we are in, apologies, we are right here in our mashup keynote address. And as we get started, I want to thank everyone who donated yesterday and participated in the student fundraising. There is still time for those who want to donate more. The link is going to be in the chat. Please go ahead and donate. And this fund supports the student chapter, and it helps with scholarships. Also, just want to remind you, we have a fun awards session going on. So the best SD meme, the most colorful poster, the best pet photos, the best PJ photos, the best conference snacks, and the best conference selfie will be getting awards. You can tag us on social media, and yeah, we want to really engage and step into the conversation. Also, just want to remind you that there are multiple ways that you can stay connected to the student organized colloquium. Of course, I just mentioned there is the social media, right? So we are on Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, LinkedIn. Conference participants can also connect via the Loop, which is a 24/7 Zoom room. Rocket Chat is also available, where you can use hashtag SOC 2021. Both the Loop and Rocket Chat can be accessed through the conference website. So let's keep the conversation going throughout the week and use this time to build long-lasting, meaningful connections, building for relationships for resilience. And I'll pass it over now to Cherie.
Thank you so much, Braveheart. So connected to what Braveheart mentioned for the reason that we chose this theme, we also, Braveheart and myself, thought about how could we make the SOC 2021 unique? And this was the reason why we came up with the mashup. So I don't really know how I know this word. I think it's from my love for music, and I find it quite interesting when different styles are put together. So basically, a mashup would be a mixture or fusion of disparate elements. Or if we think of musical terms, it's basically something that you wouldn't really think could be combined. And yeah, I think we wanted to embrace the theme, relationships for resilience, and choose two people that we admired, put them together, despite what their special interests were, and see what connections there are, see what relationships there are. So really explore that, that dynamic. So that is how it, or at least how it was conceptualized. We'll have some time for both of our keynotes to speak to us. It's going to be quite short. Usually the keynotes is just one presentation, so it's a little bit longer, but we are well prepared for this, we think. And then we'll have some time for Q&A, and it will be moderated. So please do engage during this discussion. And yeah, we really look forward to it. So Josephine will go first. Thank you so much for being our opening keynote address. And then we will hear from Irene. And after that, sorry, thanks very much. You can go on. No, next. Next slide. Next slide. Go to next slide. Sorry. Can you go after Irene? And then after that, we will have Q&A, where Braveheart and I have one particular question that we would like to ask Josephine and Irene first, and we'll allow them to comment, and then we will open up the floor. Okay, next. I think we will read the, yes, so we will read the bios now. Josephine, if there's anything missing, I'm sure you will cover this, but let me start. Josephine Kaviti Musango is a professor at the School of Public Leadership, Stellenbosch University in South Africa. She is the GENS Trilateral Research Chairholder on mainstreaming gender for energy security in poor urban environments. She previously worked for Gauteng City-Region Observatory as senior researcher, Department of Energy as Deputy Director, and Council for Scientific and Industrial Research, also known as CSIR, as Resource Economist. She holds a Transdisciplinary Doctoral in Sustainable Development and Master's degree in Agricultural Economics, both from Stellenbosch University. Josephine has over 16 years experience in using system dynamics modeling in managing change and policy-related challenges in the energy transition, green economy, and urban Africa energy issues. Her current research focus is applying system dynamics to understand gender, household, energy transition to provide better energy solutions. Josephine is one of the founding members of the South Africa System Dynamics chapter, where she serves as organizing secretary and vice president. She is currently serving as strategy oversight and international collaboration advisor of the chapter. Josephine also serves as policy council member of the International System Dynamics Society. So why this is such an honor for me, Josephine, is because I've had a few mentors in the SD field, including Jai Clifford Holmes, Bill Grace, Andy Ford, and Birgit Kapansky. And none of that would have been possible if it wasn't for you. So thank you so much for opening this door into a beautiful field that I really enjoy. And yeah, I hope that you will enjoy this presentation as much as we will. Thank you, Braveheart.
Thank you, Cherie. And then I get the extreme honor of introducing one of my favorite people in the entire galaxy, Dr. Irene Headen. So Dr. Irene Headen is an assistant professor of Black Health in the Department of Community Health and Prevention at the Drexel Dornsfield School of Public Health. Her research interests investigate the social and structural determinants of racial and ethnic disparities in adverse pregnancy outcomes, with a specific focus on neighborhood environments. She received her doctoral degree in epidemiology from the University of California, Berkeley in 2015, and continued on to complete postdoctoral fellowships at UC Berkeley and the Drexel Urban Health Collaborative. What an honor, Dr. Headen, what an honor. And I thank you so much for being here. And now I'll pass on the mic to Dr. Josephine. Dr. Josephine, please feel free to share your slides and take us away.
Thank you so much, Cherie and Braveheart. This is an honor to be here with you today. I would like to share my screen, but I'm not able. Okay, let me see that. Okay.
We see them. We see them.
Okay, so thank you once again. It's a great honor to be here with you today. And good morning, good afternoon, good evening, wherever you are tuned in for the student organized chapter. I know this is a global session that we are having today. So when Cherie and Braveheart invited me for this session, there's one question that really got me thinking. How can you build relationships for resilience in system dynamics community? I then turned that question to myself and asked, how am I building relationship for resilience in system dynamics community? And it is on this basis that I came up on this presentation that I'm going to share with you on building resilient relationship in system dynamics community. And I will reflect on my research, reflections, and insights on that process. So I want, as I go through this talk, for you to really listen, to really listen carefully on some aspects that I would be touching on building relationships for resilience. And I thank Cherie for your honor that I brought you into this particular field where you are, and I'm proud for you to see you really got into the space. So I want to start with one question as a preparation for what I'm going to share today. Think of the person that who taught you the first lesson. Who gave you the first lessons in system dynamics? You can share this on the chat, and then you also say, what did you learn from that particular lesson that you got? And I'll get back to this later in my reflections. What I would like to mention is that you might be here for the very first time, you might be here for the second time, third time, or even more. But I thank you for making the choice to be here. And because you are here because of someone who entrusted in you, and that's where the relationship for resilience begins, trust. So where did my first lesson begin? They didn't begin in the story that I'm going to start sharing on energy or that you've had. It actually started in a fish project, aquaculture project that I was involved in. But I guess there's some connection because fish gives you energy. A feedback loop maybe exists. And I think that a relationship for resilience nugget here is that connections exist even when there is no direct link. And I'll get back to this when I'm sharing my reflections. So what's my energy story? As you've heard from my bio, I've been utilizing system dynamics for the last 16 years. However, since 2008, I began using it in the energy space, particularly looking on the managing change and policy challenges in 3 energy-related themes, which is the Energy Technology Assessment, Green Economy Modeling, and Urban Africa Energy Transition. And I'll share briefly on those areas. But the question then is, why did I choose energy? Why energy? Energy is one of the global challenges of the 21st century that we are facing today, and it is linked to the issues of society, economy, and environment, issues related to health, issues related to population, issues related to climate change or emissions, and so forth. And particularly, the global challenge of climate change is really influenced by the energy sector. We see COP26 or COP conference, climate change conference of parties meetings. The issue of energy transition is the core in the climate discussions. So in relationship for resilience nugget in this perspective, I would say that in building relationships for resilience, you need to anchor yourself in your core research. But there are obviously linkages that are within other spaces or disciplines. What is common and what are the differences? And of course, energy is essential in building relationships for resilience. You need energy. So starting with my core research, my first area is energy technology assessment. This is mainly from my PhD work, where the focus was on how do we develop technology for sustainability? And particularly when we are looking for solutions in rural areas or areas where there are socioeconomic challenges. What I ended up doing was looking on technology assessment for sustainability and developing a conceptual framework which cuts across different disciplines, which were technology management, sustainable development, and energy. And because it was cutting through different disciplines, systems approach was an appropriate method of bringing together or bridging the different disciplines. And I developed a methodological framework that can cut across those different disciplines. And one key aspect of my project was that it was embedded within a larger project consisting of engineers, social scientists, anthropologists, and so forth. And I was serving there as a resource economist, system dynamicist at that point. So giving you a process of the process that I undertook in the technology assessment for sustainability, the first step was identifying the needs in the community. And at that point, it was job creation, economic empowerment within South Africa, as shown in number 1 section. And then at the time of developing the model, it was in South Africa and globally, there were discussions on bioenergy. And that's why I focused my work on bioenergy technology sustainability assessment, developing a model called BioOtso. Then the next step was developing the sustainability indicators, cutting across the socio-economic and environmental indicators that also cuts across different stakeholders from government, from industry who are developing bodies or plants, and from community members who are aimed at growing crops for biodiesel production. And number 3, it's where I developed a model consisting of 11 submodels. And then number 4, I created a platform that I could engage with the different stakeholders. And one of the relationship for resilience nugget that I can share with you here is that engagement is crucial when, particularly with non-academic environment or non-system dynamicists. And we therefore need to develop platforms that are easy to communicate. Then did I make any policy impact or any implication for my work? Again, this was very interesting because as I finished my PhD, there was a discussion on systems approach to sustainability. It was also a period when the world was going through the ups and downs of the financial crisis of the 2008, 2009. And the governments around the world were speaking about systems approach. And this is where one policymaker got attention of the systems approach, the systems approach technology sustainability framework that I developed. And this brought to my next research work on green economy modeling. And a relationship for resilience nugget, which I can share with you here, is that what you do influences others beyond your field. So in the green economy modeling work, my second area of research, I was a lead system dynamicist modeler, where the attention was to develop a model that informs policy on meeting low carbon growth, resource efficient, which is also resource efficient, and also takes into account of pro-poor job development. Again, we went through the process of developing an assessment. And when you speak with the policymakers, the main concern is usually economic growth. We had to show how the research relates to economic growth, but at the same time, the other aspects of energy, water, natural resources, and transport, as shown in number 1. Then in number 2, we were showing the linkages between the economy, the environment, and the society. What you see, for example, population is in the society aspect, water demand is in the economy, environment aspect, and then agriculture, services, and industry are in the economy. And we were able to show that using causal loop diagrams. Then the number 3 is the model that I developed. It consisted of 31 subsectors, which takes an economy-wide perspective. And the number 4 is just an illustration of how we showed results. And this one was a bit controversial because we were able to share that even without, even with the current measures that we are showing in the scenarios, the government was not able to meet the targets of energy transition or green economy transitions. So aggressive measures needed to be taken. And a relationship for resilience nugget here is that communicate insights, even though it's difficult or not as expected. 7 years later, we were subcontracted again to provide an update of the report. And this again is an illustration of relationship for resilience, where when you do your best, clients come back. So building trust is key to building relationships for resilience. And then the third research aspect that I'm currently working on is on urban energy transition, where it's the main aim is to inform urban policy with regards to urbanizing population, which particularly in Africa will end up in urban informal settlements. And most of the population in urban informal settlements is women. And most of the policy aspects on electricity, of energy provision is electricity connection through the grid. But electricity connection through the grid does not mean fulfilled energy services. So we have multiple stakeholders involved in this research, from government at different levels. We have industry partners, we have community members, as well as researchers that cuts across different universities. So in this process, you realize that a relationship for resilience nugget is there are multiple perspectives that are involved when you are engaging with multiple stakeholders. Now I've shared my research and a bit of relationship for resilient nuggets. That is more like a tip of an iceberg represented in the iceberg structure here. There is more to the process underneath the surface. And what I would like to share is that some of the aspects of my reflections on the journey, which are underneath the surface. And what I'm sharing also, it's not the entire journey, but it's part of uncovering the underneath the surface. So as I said, my first lesson didn't start from energy. It started from aquaculture. Someone planted a seed in you. Mine happened in 2005. So the person that planted a seed in you entrusted in you to build relationship for resilience. So nurture the seed that is planted. Then find connections. After a seed was planted in me, it felt like I was climbing on a slippery mountain because there were challenges that I had to overcome. And I guess you may find the same. So finding connections can help you overcome adversity and be resilient. Then get a mentor. Do you have a mentor? I've had Cherie has mentioned a number of mentors that have helped her. Do you have a mentor? Because having a mentor, they can support you and be resilient. Then stay close to the fire. For you to be able to remain active and vibrant and to build trust, you need to stay close to the fire. Because relationship for resilience, they involve trust, they involve understanding, and they also involve care. My first conference was in 2009 in Albuquerque, and it was the most amazing experience that I've ever had. Then learn by doing. For you to be able to strengthen your resilience, we need to learn by doing. The theme of SDS today, this week, is from insights to action. Nothing happens without action. A year after attending my first conference, we started a system dynamics module in Stellenbosch University with my mentor. Then connect locally. What system dynamics activities are happening in your area or in your country? It is through connecting locally you can build resilience for relationship within your own area as well. So in 2014, I was one of the founding members of South Africa's System Dynamics chapter. We were able to develop this chapter in support by the System Dynamics Society. And of course, I didn't do this alone. There was people within South Africa that we had to build this together. And we also have roundtables happening. We have Africa, the annual conference is happening. So connect locally. Then connect with the experts in the field. This is for you to be inspired because you can learn tips and tricks. It was a wonderful moment for me to capture a photo with Jay in 2016. Then reflect on your journey. In 2020, I reflected on the converging twists and turns in my life because I realized that we use system dynamics on projects, but our life is also a project. Your life is a project, and you can learn a lot on that. And then plant system dynamic seed in someone. Someone planted a seed in you. You can plant a seed in someone in order to build resilient relationship for resilience. And now, synthesizing all these stories or lessons or reflections, I'll share 4 key insights in building resilient relationships in system dynamics. So the first one is that you are a modeler. And this one question, that point I used to say inform my students in class. You are a modeler, and none of them would agree with that. Why? Because we've been modeling using mentor models, and system dynamics gives us the opportunity to map, challenge, and improve our mentor models. So in order to build relationship for resilience, be willing to build resilience within yourself to overcome and grow from setups, and for you to also be resilient with other relationships. And the second point is identify the gap and the dilemma. You know where you are and you know where you want to be. So that difference is the gap. And the dilemma is the challenge for when you're moving from where you want to be, you are, to where you want to be. So know your strengths and find someone, get someone to help. Ask someone to help. This is why we have different chapters, the student organized chapter, South Africa chapter, all the different chapters, energy chapter, and so forth. Ask someone or two to mentor you along the way. And number 3, bring the influence and the influenced on board. Remember that person who introduced you to system dynamics? Yes, that person did a great thing to you because they planted a seed, and know that you can also influence others. So focus your effort and energy where you can most have impact. And then lastly is have fun and enjoy raising system dynamics flag higher. So when you build relationships as a community, you can enjoy what you do despite change and uncertainty. So you'll hear more on how an emerging system dynamicist, Dr. Irene, is using the principles to build relationships for resilience. Finally, I would like to share my Masha perspective in terms of what my work relates to Irene's work, because I believe that in building relationship for resilience, we need to acknowledge both the similarities and the differences. In my work, I have identified 4 similarities between my work and Irene's. The first one is that we are both working on global challenges. I'm working on energy, Irene is working on health. These are global challenges that are facing both global south and global north. And we've got Sustainable Development Goal 3 and 7 that relates to those global challenges. Then number 2 similarity is that energy and health, they've got linkages. We work on issues around energy health nexus at the household level, or even the issues about how energy is creating environmental destruction, causing and leading to issues around environmental health that also impacts on human beings, on the health of human beings. That similarity is on urban context. We are also working on urban context. Urbanization is happening across the world. The world is already urbanized, and urban areas transforming. And then the 4th similarity is our application of system dynamics as a tool to understand these global challenges. Of course, there are differences. And the first difference is the issue about context. Context is key. There's no one size fits all solutions. Urbanization processes are different in the global south and those in global north. So they are observed differently. Similarly, the issue of energy and health challenges are also experienced differently. And this is where we need to look into the context specificities and understand the mental models within the different contexts. And through that, we can be able to customize our mental models and the solutions to suit the purpose and usability. And it is through that process of understanding and embracing the similarities and differences that we are able to build relationships for resilience. And with that, I thank you for your attention.
Wow, thank you. Thank you so very much, Dr. Josephine. Really, really appreciate it. And now I pass on the mic to Dr. Irene Headen.
All right, thank you all. And that was such a wonderful presentation. I'm excited to follow that. Josephine, if you can stop sharing, I will, there we go. All right. Okay. This might be starting. You might get a glimpse of well, let me start my presentation at the beginning so there are no spoilers. There we go. All right. Sorry, y'all. The videos are obscuring my ability to see the present mode. All right. Are we seeing present mode on all fronts? All right, great. Okay, so I'm excited actually to be here and talk, and I was really intrigued by this mashup approach to the keynote, because I think imbued in that is kind of building relationships for resilience. Again, as Josephine mentioned, requires different perspectives, right? You're necessarily matching up different perspectives with your own in order to find the points of connection and also find the points of resilience. So when we were talking and thinking about how are we going to, combine this into kind of the perfect Keynote remix, if you will, we really thought about like how I could build on, as a budding modeler, those principles and really give kind of like a case study of a non-system dynamicist by training in that journey towards building the resilient relationships in system dynamics. And I titled this, "The Detours Are the Path," because I've really found that in my reflections, sometimes the detours seem unexpected and you don't know where they're going, but they really become key to building both that resilience as well as bringing and cultivating those seeds as they need to be cultivated as you're on the pathway. So that will be the next 20 minutes with you all. And so I do want to start with a land acknowledgement because I am joining from the United States, which is a nation that is still, wrangling with the legacy of its past colonization. And so I want to acknowledge that I am currently on the indigenous land of the Lenni Lenape people. The Lenni Lenape people are the traditional owners of this land, which is current day Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And so I pay my respects to their ancestral, current, and ongoing stewardship of this land. Also, I've included links if you want to learn more about the Lenni Lenape people, as well as if you would like to find the kind of indigenous stewards of your own area. This is actually a global map of the indigenous populations that are distributed across the globe. So I want to start with context because I think anchoring in context and authentically being aware of what spaces we're working in is key to developing any type of relationships, especially resilient ones. So with that bit of context, I'm really going to take, my take on the path that Josephine just shared. So how did I wrangle with, that knowing that I'm a modeler, but not being a formally trained system dynamicist? How did that evolve into this gap, addressing this gap and dilemma that was increasingly overtaking and taking up space in my work? How did I use that drive to fill that gap to identifying those places of influence where I could both bring influence and also be influenced by those in those space? And of course, as I like to, end any presentation, I'm going to end with how this has been both a fun and exciting journey in raising my system dynamics flag higher, and how resilient relationships have been kind of a key part of that process. And so I'm going to start, of course, with the fact that, again, I'm not a system dynamicist, but I did start my home discipline is epidemiology. And I identify as a social epidemiologist, a perinatal epidemiologist, which really means that I focus on outcomes around the time of childbearing, and also an urban health, public health researcher. And again, because I love to give more context as I'm talking about this journey, I got my doctorate at the School of Public Health at the University of California, Berkeley. So that's where a lot of these, events and relationship building contexts were evolving and unfolding. And for the last about, I think, 4 or 5 years, I've been at Drexel University, first as a postdoc in the Urban Health Collaborative, and now as an assistant professor in the Department of Community Health and Prevention. And in addition to being an epidemiologist, a social epidemiologist, and an urban health researcher, I truly identify as a racial health inequities researcher. And I think these two graphs I want to use these two graphs to kind of convey to you why that kind of distinction for me both is important and also kind of was the seed to that itch that I couldn't quite scratch that launched me on this path to system dynamics. So on the left, you can see infant mortality rates by race in the United States. On the right, there is maternal mortality rates by race in the United States. And as epidemiologists, we're interested in population health. How can we improve the health of the population by identifying risk factors, developing interventions based off of those risk factors, developing implementation strategies that can amplify and scale those interventions to a population level? And if you look at these maps, which are from graphs from 1935 to 2007, you can really see at the population level, we've done a great job. We've reduced infant mortality for, Black, white, and overall population substantially since 1935. Maternal mortality has dropped even more. And so if we were just looking at that, it would just be, okay, we're doing a good job of identifying risk factors, developing interventions, and implementing those interventions. But for me as a racial health inequities researcher, this blue line and this gray line really define the niche of my work. And if we look at those, we can see that we are not at all, hitting the mark in identifying those risk factors, identifying those approaches that are going to reduce these disparities. If anything, especially in the infant mortality case, our population level efforts have increased the disparities. And so that started that itch in my brain of like, well, if we're doing everything that we can do in epidemiologic terms, using our epidemiologic tools, what's going on? Is it our methods? Is it our approach? Is it our theory? But what's going on? So that was kind of the first kind of itch that started just kind of gnawing at my brain. And that first led me to dovetail my work on racial health inequities with the fact that structural racism in the US context permeates all social contexts. And so the structural racism is defined generally as the totality of ways in which societies foster racial discrimination through mutually reinforcing inequitable systems, of which you can see in the graphic on your right, that in turn reinforce discriminatory beliefs, values, and distributions of resources. And so for me, that was kind of, maybe it's this embedded in this understanding of structural racism, we can unpack why we see persistent increases in disparities as we're seeing persistent decreases in population levels, health outcomes in the US. And that was kind of the first kind of foray, but there was still this issue. I was understanding neighborhoods as a manifestation of structural racism. There are still these issues that kind of amplify this itch in my brain. And the first is that epi methods are geared toward linear approaches to identify independent effects. And this graphic from this paper was kind of the key papers that I engaged with in my training. I think in my doctoral training, I had this like marked up and was like at the ready at any time, so that I could leverage, the use of directed acyclic graphs, which for epidemiology is kind of our gold standard for framing and communicating the dynamics of your problem. And as you can see in the name, they're necessarily acyclic. So if we're looking at neighborhoods as a manifestation of structural racism, we really are in a directed acyclic graph saying, how does neighborhood lack of food, healthy food, impact, in this case, it's incident CVD, in my case, it's maternal health outcomes, impact these health outcomes independent of neighborhood violence, independent of income, right? And in these linear causal pathways. And if you look back at the definition of structural racism, there's kind of this tension, right? Independence doesn't really capture those reinforcing inequitable systems, these reinforcement of discriminatory beliefs, values, and distributions. And as I developed, as I was getting my doctoral training, EPI was also wrangling with the fact that these linear approaches really weren't doing the job when we're thinking about social and structural determinants of health. I put these two papers for reference if you have free time and want to understand epidemiology's wrangling with the tensions, the limits of linearity. These were two really great papers that kind of expanded from there. And really those were the seeds of like, well, maybe it's a systems approach. Maybe it's like looking at these things together and interdependently that we want to work towards. So that was kind of the first kind of seed of moving towards being a modeler. The second itch that kind of kept growing in my brain was that as I was presenting my findings to community members, as I was talking about the work that we're doing with neighborhoods and health, they were really dissatisfied because isolating independence effects, so that independent effect of neighborhood food environment on health, controlling for neighborhood violence, does not at all vibe with how communities experience health. So they'd sit through presentations, politely listen, and then say, well, how are you going to look at food environment without thinking about violence? And while you're at it, what about the fact that our transportation doesn't go where we need to? The fact that there's services that have been shut down that really interfere with our ability to navigate our space in, useful ways. And as an epidemiologist, there were too many times when I had to kind of stutter and stumble and say, well, our regression model doesn't fully account for or comes up with power issues with power limitations when we start to look at interactions. I can tell you community members really stare at you blankly and then have kind of this look like, oh, that's nice, but you're not answering the question that we asked. That's important to us. And so my first, trend of research was around how can my work with the existing tools of epidemiology push towards this kind of interdependent way of looking at the world that communities experience, right? That really acknowledges the problem in the context in which they experience it. And these are two papers that I published looking at neighborhood typology, expanding, kind of playing with this idea of accumulation, both in space and over time. But even as I wrangled with this, it wasn't enough. And that's really where my journey began. It seemed that rather than try to have the problem fit the methods that I was kind of embedded in, the epidemiologic methods, it's rather that our methods should actually fit the problem. And that was where I leveraged kind of this gap and this dilemma that launched me and pushed me forward on this pathways for system dynamics. Although at the time, I didn't know it was system dynamics or even systems. It really sparked what it was this kind of need to build relationships outside of my discipline. And as I built those relationships, I kind of took a broad lens. I connected with people in ethnic studies to see if it was we needed to expand our theory. If I connected with people in urban planning to see whether it was kind of maybe we were misunderstanding the dynamics of urban environments. I connected with people in law, and here I have the book Killing the Black Body, which is really a great kind of ethnography or understanding of the creation of Blackness and Black kind of oppression through pregnancy and the experience of gender in the US. I engaged with that to see if there were nuggets for, was it a variable that was missing? Was there a method that we could implement? What was it that would allow our methods or my methods to fit the problem at hand? And really kind of going back to what Josephine said in kind of the space of relationship building and resilient relationship building, what I was trying to do was shift my mental model to expand to be able to address the problem at hand, to be able to expand to address that gap and that dilemma. And on that process, I can say it was rough. So disciplinary barriers are actually harder to shift than mental models. In many of those rooms, I was engaging with people where we'd align with the mental model of we needed more approaches that allowed for interdependent relationships within how we understood racism and structural racism as drivers of health. But a lot of those, the implementation of those relationships hit barriers when this discipline, what I needed to succeed in my discipline of epidemiology, was not what my sociologist colleagues needed to succeed in those disciplines. And I put this nugget in because as you're on the journey, you may be relationship building, but there may be these unexpected barriers to embedding resilience in those relationships due to exogenous factors. In this case, the exogenous factor was the fact that academia still has a very siloed approach to understanding and developing knowledge production. And really that just kind of, after a few hitting the walls in terms of like building relationships, but not those relationships not being kind of resilient to being able to advance on this pathway towards, using system dynamics or embedding systems in my work, I took a complete left turn. I was kind of like, let's just do something completely different. And I really kind of brought in my personal life, as Josephine has mentioned, both your academic and your personal life are projects. And so for a time I was exploring, what if I dig into my personal passions to see if they inform my ability to embed a systems approach or an interdependent approach in my work. In that space, I delved into Afrofuturism. Here I've kind of put my favorite book by Octavia Butler as a kind of teaser for that. And being in that Afrofuturist space really led me toward the organization Data for Black Lives, which was a cross-sectoral, multidisciplinary movement to use data science to create concrete, measurable change in the lives of Black people. And it was really in this space where the relationship building that happened aligned with a bit of serendipity. So Data for Black Lives actually put on a system dynamics workshop in their conference, and I was able to be one of the core modeling teams. And so that was really where kind of the journey, the relationships, the planning, and the seed coalesced into it actually being able to implement it in my work. And from there, the road ahead is really kind of building this fun, building these relationship building for resilience as I've embedded more and more into the system dynamics community. And, you know, through my career development award that I received to actually formally train in system dynamics to address maternal health inequities, also flying that flag in some of the community-based work that's going on here in Philadelphia with the OVA Birth Justice Coalition, informed by the Public Health Department, the Maternal Child and Family Health Department, as well as colleagues here at Drexel that are looking to use system dynamics or system science and public health, as well as connecting and building that relationship within SD for those who are interested, in looking for health inequities, as well as understanding and unpacking structural racism from a system dynamics lens. And I would be remiss if I didn't put in a plug that with Braveheart, we've been co-chairing the first kind of structural racism special interest group that if you're interested in, we would love for you to attend one of our meetings. So I will actually pause there, and if Braveheart or someone can give me a time check, I can either wrap it up and open it up to questions, or spend a few minutes on my, reflections from the road so far.
Dr. Headen, this is perfect. If you're okay with it, we can do. Yep. We can deal with the questions now, and perhaps your points can come up at that time.
That Great. Sounds excellent.
Awesome. Thank you so very much. Dr. Headen and Dr. Josephine, really riveting talks. I, for one, am super excited. We've had a couple of questions in the question answers, and I invite all the folks who are watching this webinar, please add your questions. And if you see a question that you are also resonating with, please upvote it. We have a super volunteer, Mara, who's going to be taking the questions and asking the panelists. So Mara, over to you.
Awesome, thank you. Great presentation, both of you. It was a lot of fun to listen to. We'll start with the first question. It says, modeling can help us perceive the complex system we study, but it can also notice details we couldn't pick up. So isn't resilience complementary to the systems thinking paradigm and system dynamics? So that was during Dr. Josephine's presentation, but if either of you want to answer it, go for it.
Josephine, if you want to, since it was during your presentation, do you want to jump in?
I'm rereading the question again to get clarity of it. I can't see the question again. Okay. So the question you ask is whether modeling can help us perceive the complex system we study, but we always notice, oh, yes. Yeah, of course, in modeling, in complex systems, we don't see everything, but we cannot even solve a complex problem, but we can only manage it. And building resilience, relationship for resilience is helping us to bring different perspectives that can help us to see the problem from multiple angles. Unlike if you're dealing with the problem without taking into account of the multiple perspectives. In terms of the systems thinking paradigm, of course, system dynamics process, if you look on system dynamics process, the first two steps of system dynamics process is understanding the problem to conceptualize it, which requires systems thinking, and then dynamic hypothesis, so which is part of systems thinking. So you cannot separate system dynamics from systems thinking, because the first two process, it's what allows you to be able to understand the problem and contextualize it. So the resilience for relationships helps you to bring the different perspectives to understand the problem. And then you can be able to model it using system, the quantitative part of it. And of course, there are some things that we cannot measure. There are things that we cannot be able to accommodate. And that's where expert opinion based on the experiences can help us. We cannot capture everything. That's why complex systems, we manage them. We cannot solve them. They do not have a single solution. Thank you for your question.
And if I can build on that as well. So I think that's an interesting question. I think it hits on one of the reflections that I had from my kind of journey in building resilient relationships, and kind of like this key of defining the problem. Because I noticed as I was kind of summarizing it, at different points in my process, there were different types of resilience that needed to be built, right? So then you're solving for a different type of problem, building capacity in those relationships for different types of resilience. So at the beginning of my journey, it was really academic resilience. I needed to build relationships that allowed me to resiliently engage and move forward with bringing in systems approaches into my work, right? Around the middle of the path, I needed personal resilience. So building relationships in spaces where I could bring my personal life into this exploration of doing something that was kind of counterintuitive for the academic spaces that I was in. And then and I guess I would say ongoing now, at points in the path, there were times when I was building relationships to embed or kind of amplify my creative resilience, right? And I see if you're thinking about how to structure feedback in the processes and how you build into or kind of amplify or grow or cultivate those relationships in that relationship space in system dynamics and outside of system dynamics, understanding what problem you're solving for, what type of resilience might you want to cultivate more at certain points, and what resilience might be helpful later on, was actually something that I found was, surprise, a dynamic process and evolved over time.
Thank you both. We'll go to the next question, and it's, how can we design a system where there are resilient relationships? So relying on a small group of champions or firefighters has been the norm, but we need everyone involved. And I think it kind of goes to the next question too, about, sharing this with community members, and how would you do that? So 2 parts.
Wow, that's a very exciting question, because especially when you have to engage with community members, building trust is the key point. So you have to actually go through a process of building rapport and trust. And I'm giving this actually from a process that we are currently going through with my last project that I mentioned about urban informal settlements, where if you have to engage in urban informal settlement, you don't just go into the informal settlements. You are already an outsider. So you need to have that process of finding a community liaison and engaging with them, gain rapport, understand what is it that you want to do. And from that project, I can say we've engaged with community radio station, which we've able to sign a memorandum of understanding between the community radio station and Stellenbosch University. We've also recruited co-researchers, community members involved in data collection and training. We also have community liaison, a school where we have meetings and so forth. So it's a process of building trust that is very crucial in building relationships for resilience. The same thing I can speak about the process of forming the South Africa chapter. So we had to organize the people around who are involved in South Africa system dynamics. And it's a process of building trust and bringing the people together. Building trust is key in creating relationships for resilience, from my experience.
And I would really just echo that in my work using or increasingly using system dynamics to address structural racism and health in the US, it hinges on, you know, building trust within communities, because as Josephine mentioned, like I am an outsider even in the Philadelphia context that I'm in, right? Because structural racism manifests differently in different places and cities across the US, even though it's from a core root origin. And so it's really kind of like rooting in that process of building trust, because without that resilience is just not going to be there. The relationships are going to be, you know, brief and maybe not really robust to, again, like you're co-changing mental models as you're evolving these relationships. So if they're not resilient and there's not that trust, there may be divergences that come along quite easily that really sever that relationship, rather than allow for resilience that allow to bridge across those maybe divergences in mental models to come back together. And that's mainly what I've been doing with building, bringing in those community-based organizations, the Birth Justice Philly organization, and even just having conversations with the community members here in Philadelphia to, build that trust. It's a critical element of that.
And just also adding on Irene's comment on that, it takes time. So this way, trusting the process becomes crucial. And the detours that Irene just mentioned, you'll find yourself taken to detours and twists. So enjoy the detour tour in the process.
And I think Cherie has a question, so go for it.
Thank you so much for your talks. And I apologize if I didn't get this during the presentation. I'm still a little bit unclear on the connection between health issues and racism and energy. And Irene, you had two slides that stood out to me. So I wonder if it is still possible for you to share your screen and go to it if needs be, but it's not urgent. But it was the diagram where you had the various, let me just find it now. Sorry about this. Where you're speaking about that itch that you had to scratch, and it had like structural racism in the middle, and then various sectors coming out like law, health, environment. So where's energy in this little cluster is my first question. And then it links to another slide, which was slide 10. You've actually numbered them, sorry. So slide 10 as well. Where are those links there? So I don't know if I'm articulating this clearly. I'm just really I'm trying to understand what are the connections between racism, energy, and health. And particularly from like my understanding in South Africa, where racism is also very much linked to inequality, and in our case, it's the majority that is less fortunate, that doesn't have enough energy, that doesn't have health security. Yet they're the majority in South Africa. So I don't know if either of you have a comment on that.
I'd love to dig in and just to share with everyone those slides. So I won't go into presenter mode because then I can't see everyone. So it's this slide where I think this is the diagram you were talking about, Cherie. But so when I think about depicting structural racism in the domains across which it operates, it's not necessarily like okay, so if I think about energy, right? Energy can perpetuate across many of these different elements of domains, right? So if we think about energy and environment, right? Are there equitable approaches to, and then again, this is the US context, which is where I'll start. And then maybe Josephine can kind of bring in the perspectives from South Africa, but is the way in which energy is being created in an equitable sense, disproportionately impacting for, and again, in our case, it's the minority. So Black and brown populations are the minority in the US, but are they disproportionately impacting the minority in terms of their health outcomes compared to the majority? And is there a feedback loop between the ways in which energy is created for the majority that actually drives health inequities in the structurally marginalized groups, right? So that's one area. But when you think more broadly, I think energy is an interesting kind of intersection because energy can perpetuate across many of these domains. And the way that I think of this heuristic and build, again, I think this is a big part of building relationships, right? It's like knowing where you're starting, but also knowing to where you're bridging from. And so the way that I think of this heuristics is really kind of like a starting position that says there are many domains in which structural racism permeates in the US, and thinking about both the context of structural racism as well as whatever you're linking it to. So in this case, energy, how do we then kind of expand and translate to find those places of overlap, those places of co-relationship that would expand, again, both of our mental models in understanding structural racism and energy. And it could also have this feedback of understanding energy and structural marginalization in the South Africa context, where it's not going to look the same, right, as structural racism in the US, just because it's two different countries, it's two different processes, two different histories. But are there seeds of how this is being manifested in the US that would translate? And are there seeds from how that's being manifested in the South African context that would translate to the US so that we could create kind of these, and it kind of goes back to what Josephine was saying, create an expanded mental model in which we can build understanding and embed resilience in the relationships for understanding these systems approaches to addressing both energy, structural racism, and health as we move forward. So that's a little bit, I'll stop rambling and stop sharing and see if Josephine, you have any insights on that as well.
Yeah, so thank you so much, Irene, for those insights in terms of how energy can be related in various aspects. You are rightly, you're right in terms of energy being embedded in various aspects. And one of the aspects that I see clearly linked, particularly to the work that I do, is with regards to housing, because we cannot discuss housing without aspects of basic needs. And basic needs, energy is part of them. Water is part of them. Sanitation is part of them. So when we look in our urban context, in the marginalized communities, then we are looking at energy issues from that point of view. And again, from the housing perspective, there are different types of housing. There are different types of buildings. We've got aluminum or metal shacks. We've got wooden shacks. We've got attached shacks. All of them require different types of energy. And again, it's different types of marginalized populations that live in those different spaces. And I see perhaps that could be where linkages can be tied up. But from South African context and from the work that I do, that would mainly from inequality, marginalized populations, and so forth. One of the aspects that we are wanting to bring in our work is that rather than seeing these spaces as marginalized, how do we reframe the narrative in the way that we empower the communities rather than seeing them as victims, as vulnerable? Because in the way we frame policy or the way we frame contexts influences how we build relationships for resilience. So if we frame them as vulnerable, that's how we will will frame our relationships. If we frame them as change agents, then the resilience for relationships would be different. And that's how we are doing it in the space that I just mentioned right now. The question we are asking is, what can you do for your community?
Wow.
Not what the government can do for you.
Fantastic.
We are reframing the narrative.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Musango. Thank you, Dr. Headen. Really, really grateful for both of you. This was fantastic. My mind is completely blown. Thank you very, very much. We're a few minutes over time, so I want to thank all the participants who are here. I'll request the panelists to stay over here for a second, to stay here and we'll take a selfie together. But all the participants, please, thank you very much. Our next session is going to be in 45 minutes. I can actually share screen. Right, great. So our next session is going to be in, an hour, and that's going to be the student plenary presentations. It's going to be actually 45 minutes now because you're 15 minutes over, but we'll see you there. The link is on ISDC's website. Go ahead, Cherie.
Sorry, I'll speak after you.
Okay. Thank you very much. Really grateful you all are here. Go, Cherie.
Thank you. I just wanted to say that if there are any further questions that we didn't get to today, please do engage via the various methods, because I think this, for me, just finding the connections between these and not just saying, oh, we need to build relationships for resilience, but actually doing it. So changing policy, changing the narrative, that's what's most important. So if there are follow-up questions, reach out to the panelists. If you are interested in this sort of discussion and mashup, please reach out to me, because it's something that really fascinates me and we can continue the conversation. Thanks.
Thank you. Thank you all.